Okay, here we are with our hand fragment. This is the base mesh that I've provided to you guys, and we're going to use this, and we'll also do a little setup with Z-spheres just to test the facility of those. But I think for the purpose of doing our final hand sculpt for this week, we're going to use the base mesh. Just because there's a number of angles and features of this that kind of give us an advantage over starting with Z-spheres. And so I really want you guys to get in depth into looking at the forms of the hand. And so I want to give you guys a little bit of a head start. Okay, so first I want to give you a little tour of the mesh and just kind of talk through some of the points to reiterate what I said in the lecture. First, the edge loops are fairly sparse, and really it's just meant to block in the form, as you know, because I consider this type of geometry kind of invaluable for being our level 1 mesh, right? We'll subdivide higher, obviously, but for this, there's a number of features that are really useful, and that, to start, is the subdivisions along the fingers. Right, and we're just going to look at these because this is not final yet, so I'm going to have to do some tweaking still to get this ready to really move ahead. And all of this is going to be done with the move brush at level 1, pretty much, maybe a little bit of the nudge brush. But the things I want you guys to attend to are subdivisions along the knuckles and the proportions of them. Right, so first he has a little bit of gesture to his hand, right? So his fingers aren't straight out, and this is just kind of a naturalistic pose. It doesn't necessarily make it easy for us to proportion these, but it's something that just gives a better starting point for sculpting a default hand, because you'll have, with a little bit of bend in the fingers, you have a place for knuckles to appear. You have the subtle convexities to the hand, and you get the distribution of rotations across the joints. In a perfectly straight hand with arms spread, or with fingers spread out, you're kind of at a disadvantage for placing the knuckles. But it's a double-edged sword, so there's advantages to each. But first I want to kind of give you guys a little working tour of adjusting, tweaking these proportions. So remember what I said, that from kind of the midpoint of the knuckle to the first digit. So this first joint, or shall we say the second knuckle, first knuckle being here, this proportion is 1 unit, and then from here to the end of the finger is also 1. And then dividing that is kind of a 2/3 relationship. So 2/3 between here and here is the third knuckle. Okay, and so I'm just kind of proportioning those edge loops out to give me that kind of characteristic. The other thing we have to be aware of is kind of the overall length of the finger from kind of the base of the metacarpals to the end of the finger. We know that on the extended middle finger, we're kind of talking about half and half when looking at the palmar view, right? So from here to the end of the finger, those should each be 1, kind of half and then half. Again, this should be kind of review from our lecture earlier. Okay, so I'm just going to try to extend this middle finger a little bit, and you can see that with the move brush big enough to grab the whole tip of the finger, I'm really starting to pull the other fingers around. We can get around this by using a kind of transpose mask, which occasionally I do, kind of doing this, inverting, and then going back to your brush with everything else masked, and that works well. However, we're going to have so many instances of doing this between the fingers that we really want to explore something called topological masking. And I mentioned this a little bit in the brushes setup video, but I'll just go over kind of the critical feature. So enable topological masking on your move brush, and then having the range at 3 essentially means that it's going to look for all vertices within 3 times the cursor size to move. Okay, and if we're doing a big pull like this, you can see that we're getting a little bit of masking, but we're getting a lot of incidental motion on these other fingers. That's because our range is set too high there. Okay, so if we just go back and drop this down to 1, we'll try that and see if that gives us the desired effect. We're still using a big cursor size, and just a quick test says that, yeah, we're pretty good. You can set it even lower than 1 if you want to go even fractional. You could go to 0.1, but that would start to affect the vertices under the cursor, which you don't really want to do. Okay, so I'm just going to give this a little pull up to lengthen him, and I would give this guy a little push down because he's getting a little bit too long. And then we're just going to look at the other fingers as well, and I think that probably the pinky finger needs a bit of adjustment as well, right? Because he's quite small and his joints have their own kind of alignments where they fall in line with the other joints. For example, the end of the pinky finger should probably fall approximately in line with the third knuckle of the fourth finger. Okay, so then again, just looking at the distribution of the edges. So on the back, really, we're looking for kind of the hard knuckles, right? So these are going to be the things that that really establish the form of and the gesture of the fingers. These lines between segments on the back. On the front, we have fat pads, right? We have little skin and fat pads. And what I'm saying about the proportions in the back is kind of a different rule in the front, as I described in the lecture. In the front, the fat pad of kind of the end of the metacarpals right here, and kind of the pads of the fingers, sit over top of the knuckles, right? So they actually are totally redistributing the proportional lengths of the fingers on the front view, right? And actually what happens is in the front view, these fingers end up being, the segments of the fingers end up being roughly equal length. So this is me spending a little bit of time proportioning these segments to be roughly the same length each. Okay, so that's a rough start. Again, we're going to have to be adjusting these volumes as we go. Anybody looking at this, hopefully with a critical eye, will say, just kind of looking at the sweep of the knuckles, will say there's a problem with the alignment of the middle finger, right? And that his knuckle needs to be way out. It's going to be the furthest knuckle, so that we get a natural arc between all of our knuckles, and probably the first needs to come back a little bit. And then we'll redistribute this. All right, so anytime you're adjusting proportions of the digits, there's a knock-on effect to further knuckles, especially if you have the lengths of the fingers fixed already. Then you really have to kind of be careful about how you adjust them. And again, this is why I use a nice level 1 mesh to just easily do this and set things up before I get too involved in sculpting forms. Okay, now that we're kind of a little further along, I want you guys to look at the profile of the fingers, right? And this is kind of to do with the relationship between these proportions that we established in the back and kind of the bend of the knuckles, these contour lines being the bend of the knuckles, and then the breaks in the fat pads in the front. Look at the angles between these. Essentially, they're not kind of perfectly bisecting the finger. They're going at an angle based on the curvature of the digits. And actually, I'm going to introduce a little bit of curvature in this first digit to get the ratio of angles correct. Remember that it's a roughly a 2-to-1 relationship. So if this joint here, the second knuckle, is bent 2 units, the natural kind of unencumbered rotation of the third knuckle is to do half of that, right? So if this does 2 units, this does 1 unit of rotation. And as you go through that range, it kind of gets closer and closer to a bent finger. Okay, and then these lines end up becoming the rays that go out from the center point of the curved finger that's kind of rolled into a knuckle. Okay, so again, I'm introducing, like in the pinky finger, a little bit more of that correct distribution of rotations. Okay, the next thing that we're going to have to do to make this kind of a nice working setup is we're going to have to set up poly groups for these fingers, because we really don't want to have to be working through occluded fingers to get the profiles and the relationships correct. Like right now, I'd really like to work on this third finger, but I can't quite because the pinky and the fourth finger are in the way. So really this is just going to be using some of the tools that we've learned already. I'm just going to do this kind of thing and then do our grow visibility, and then I will mask our polygroup visible. Let me just collapse all these menus. Okay, so visibility I will grow until I get to the knuckle. And that's about it. I'm going to grow one more. And so we'll take it all the way down to the base, and then polygroups, group visible. Okay, so let me turn on my visibility and everybody can see what's going on. Okay, so same again for this finger. Group visible. Yes, they're separate. They came out roughly the same color, but it's okay. I think I have a top there. That looks okay. Group visible. Do this one. And then we'll go back in for the thumb. You want a good clean selection, even if it's just well, it's not a clean selection. Let me just rotate him into a better position. That will work. That seems to be okay, so we'll go with that, and now we'll group visible. And why not just do one for the base of the hand as well? And the wrist. Okay, so that's pretty good setup for the polygroups, and that'll give us the ability to quickly get into our other fingers. So if I want to get in to work on this guy, which I do, I'll just do 2 clicks. And really, there is a lot of time spent doing this sort of thing on fingers, right? Because really they're little sculptures in themselves, all the angles and all the plane changes, which is why I'm giving you guys very few sculpts to work on this week. I just want you guys to really concentrate on getting one finished well, because it is time consuming, and you really just have to be in kind of a Zen state to approach this. Okay, and we haven't even subdivided yet, so we're really kind of just trying to set ourselves up for success. And I just want to give you guys a feel for how this base mesh is meant to work. Okay, so I'm going to leave this here for right now, and I'll be back in a little bit to show you guys how we're going to approach subdividing this to respect a little bit of the form. Okay, see you in a little bit.